A common but ultimately unhelpful strategy for managing rejection sensitivity is trying to simply feel less, to talk yourself out of caring, to numb the reaction, to become the kind of person nothing gets to. This rarely works for long, and when it does seem to work, it often comes at the cost of genuine connection. Because the same sensitivity that makes rejection painful is frequently tied to the capacity for deep empathy and care that makes relationships meaningful in the first place. The more durable approach isn't reducing the depth of feeling, it's changing what the feeling is responding to. Right now, for many people with high rejection sensitivity, the alarm fires based on old evidence, past experiences where disapproval genuinely was dangerous. The work isn't to mute the alarm, it's to feed it new, current evidence repeatedly until it updates. This reframe matters because it changes what progress actually looks like. Progress isn't the day you stop caring what people think. It's the day a piece of feedback still stings, briefly, but no longer derails your whole afternoon, because some part of you now has enough evidence that you're not actually in danger. One of the simplest, most immediately useful tools is also one of the least intuitive: naming the reaction out loud, even just internally, the moment it happens. Something like, "This is my rejection sensitivity. My alarm's gone off, and that doesn't necessarily mean there's a fire." This sounds almost too simple to matter, but it does something genuinely useful at a neurological level. It engages the part of the brain responsible for reflective thinking, which tends to quiet the more reactive, alarmed part, at least slightly. The goal here isn't to argue yourself out of the feeling entirely or to pretend it isn't happening. It's to create a small gap between the trigger and your response. Enough space to ask, what's the actual evidence here? Before acting on the assumption that something has gone badly wrong. This gets easier with repetition. The first few times, naming the alarm might do very little to change how intense the moment feels. Over weeks and months of consistent practice, most people find the gap widens. The alarm still sounds, but it no longer completely takes over. Rejection sensitivity thrives on ambiguity: the unanswered text, the flat tone, the pause before a reply, because ambiguous situations leave room for the nervous system to fill in the worst possible story. A practical counter to this is deliberately separating what you actually know from what you're assuming in the moment, on paper if it helps. For example, what I know is that they haven't replied in 3 hours. What I'm assuming is that they're upset with me, or that I've done something wrong. Written down like this, the gap between fact and assumption often becomes obvious, in a way it doesn't when it's just looping in your head. This doesn't eliminate the discomfort of not knowing, but it stops the assumption from being treated as settled fact. A useful extension of this is keeping a simple, ongoing record, even mentally, of times a feared rejection didn't actually materialize. The message that felt ignored but turned out to be a busy day. The feedback that felt devastating but changed nothing about the relationship. These moments are easy to forget precisely because nothing dramatic happened, but they're the exact evidence the nervous system needs, collected and referred back to. Over time, this practice does something more significant than managing any single moment. It builds a track record. Each time an assumed rejection turns out not to have happened, that's genuine evidence your nervous system can draw on next time, slowly shifting the baseline expectation from rejection is likely to rejection is possible but not the default. For many people with high rejection sensitivity, expressing a need or a boundary comes wrapped in so much preemptive apology that the actual message gets lost. "I'm so sorry, I know this is probably really annoying and please don't be upset, but I don't think I can make it this weekend." The apology is doing emotional work. trying to disarm any possible disapproval before it can land. A useful practice is deliberately stripping the apology out and saying the plain sentence instead, "I can't make it this weekend." This feels exposed at first, precisely because it removes the cushioning that felt protective. But the cushioning was never actually preventing disapproval. It was just delaying and softening your own experience of the discomfort of possibly disappointing someone. Practicing this in low-stakes situations first, a small preference, a minor scheduling change, builds the same kind of evidence discussed earlier. Most of the time, the plain sentence lands completely fine, without the imagined fallout. That repeated, ordinary evidence is what eventually makes the plain sentence feel less risky. Building emotional safety isn't only an internal, individual project. The environments and relationships you're in matter enormously too. Someone with high rejection sensitivity will generally do better, faster, in relationships and workplaces where feedback is given kindly and directly, and worse in ones where criticism is harsh, unpredictable, or used as a form of control, regardless of how much internal work they're doing. This is worth naming plainly, because a lot of advice on this topic focuses entirely on individual coping, as though the environment doesn't matter. It does. If a relationship or workplace consistently confirms the worst fears rejection sensitivity generates, no amount of internal reframing will fully compensate for that ongoing evidence. Part of healing genuinely involves noticing, honestly, whether the people and settings around you are safe enough to practice this new way of relating within. A useful, gentle test is to notice how you feel in the hours after spending time with someone, generally steadier and more like yourself, or generally more anxious and smaller. Neither feeling is proof of anything on its own, but a consistent pattern over weeks and months is real information, worth taking seriously rather than explaining away every single time. This doesn't mean every difficult relationship should be abandoned. It means being honest about where the difficulty is coming from, an old pattern you're actively working on, or a genuinely unsafe dynamic that deserves to be named as such, rather than absorbed as more evidence that something is wrong with you. Patterns this deeply practiced rarely shift quickly, and expecting fast change is often what causes people to give up on this work early, mistaking normal, gradual progress for failure. A more realistic expectation. The intensity of individual reactions tends to soften gradually over months of consistent practice, not days, and setbacks, a bad week where old patterns resurface fully, are a normal part of that process, not evidence it isn't working. What tends to change first isn't the initial reaction itself, but the recovery time afterwards. Early on, a perceived rejection might derail an entire day. With practice, it might derail an hour, then eventually just a few minutes, even while the initial sting remains real. That shortening recovery time is usually the clearest, most trustworthy sign of genuine progress, well before the reaction itself fully changes. This closes Series 16 on rejection sensitivity. The pattern was learned, over time, through real experience, which means it can be reshaped the same way, slowly through new experience, repeated consistently, with patience for a process that was never going to be instant.